So we left off in the first session talking about onset and rhyme. So this is just a review question. Which part of the word sport is the onset and which is the rhyme? So the SP, the sp, is the onset and the ort is the rhyme. In one syllable words, the onset is the first letters before the vowel, and then the rhyme is the last part of the word, so it's the vowel and everything after. And then to the right, you can just see some examples. All right, so then these are just some general things about consonants. So some useful generalizations about consonants and vowels. Consonants are obviously like the B, C, D, F, G, everything that is not a vowel. Consonant letters are fairly reliable. There's a strong relationship between the letter and the sound we expect it to represent. And consonants basically are what represents the dominant sounds in words. So when you're saying a word, you hear the consonants. There are some irregularities with consonants. So a letter can represent more than one phoneme. So a letter can have more than one sound. So for example, some consonant letters may produce a hard or soft sound. So the hard C is the sound in cat. You hear k, at. The soft C is the sound of s and scent. So it's the same letter, but it's making the k and the s. And then another example is the hard G. So the sound of g in game. And the soft G is the sound of j in gym and gentle. So they all start with the letter G, but they're making different sounds, which are phonemes.
And then consonant blends, we talked about those under the phonological awareness umbrella. It's when you hear outwardly each sound that the consonant makes. So the word blend itself has a blend at the beginning of the word, the b, l, where you hear both of those sounds. So each phoneme is still heard. Words like blame, smile, scream, grin, slime, things like that, where you hear both of them, those are consonant blends. So that trick to help you remember is the word blend itself has a blend in it, where you outwardly hear the B and the L. So these letters do not make a new sound. We hear each sound through the end. So blends are consonant pairs or clusters that you hear both of them.
Oops. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. And then a digraph is kind of just the opposite, where two consonants are coming together, but you hear a new sound. So if you think about words like laugh or shush, like those consonants are coming together to make a new sound. In sing, that ng sound is one sound. You don't outwardly hear the N and the G. They come together to make a new sound. So the trick there is that the word digraph has a digraph in it. The P and the H are coming together to make the sound. So a formal definition is a group of two successive consonants whose phonetic value is a single sound. For example, the ch in much or the ng in sing.
So then just touching back on phonemic awareness, which we've talked about a little bit. So phonemic awareness, the definition of that is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate individual sounds. So we say sounds because it's all with the lights off. You're not focusing on any written language at all. It's just what you're hearing. It's all auditory. Oh my goodness. Sorry.
You're good.
I can't close it because the thing's in the way. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so it's purely auditory and it does not involve a connection to the written form of language. So phonemic awareness refers specifically to the ability to manipulate individual sounds or phonemes in words, and it relates only to the individual phonemes, and there's several levels of phonemic awareness that you have under your phonemic awareness umbrella. So again, it's the understanding that a word is made up of discrete sounds. So we like to stress it's talking about manipulating individual sounds in words. And it's the awareness of word units larger than the phonemes, such as like words within a sentence, rhyming using words, syllables within, there are syllables within words, and then features of individual phonemes, such as how the mouth, vocal cords, and teeth are used to produce those said sounds. So why would phonological awareness come before phonics? Awareness that words consist of sounds is a prerequisite skill before children can learn to associate sounds with letters and manipulate sounds to blend words during reading and segment those words. So phonological awareness must come before phonics instruction because it's like a instructional implication idea.
Yeah. And since phonics involves the relationship between the letters and the sounds, before children start looking at those actual letters, they need to have an understanding of what sounds are in words. Not necessarily, of course, under phonological awareness will they know what those letters are because there is no connection to that written language. But when you start in phonics to represent the w sound with a W, they can match that sound with a letter. So first they need to understand how to really speak and hear sounds. And then in phonics is where they're matching that up with the letters. So before they're matching it up with the written form of language, they need to be able to say it because it's both components. And then a phoneme. So under phonemic awareness, a phoneme is the basic unit of speech. There are more phonemes than there are letters in English, like Katie talked about. In cat, we have the hard k sound, and then in the other C word, change or something, we have a different C sound. So yeah, so phonemes are like building blocks that make syllables and words, which make sentences. So a word, the number of letters in a word doesn't always match the number of phonemes. You can have a phoneme come together, like in the word book. You have 3 phonemes, but you have 4 letters because the sound in the middle is only 1 phoneme, even though we know it's 2 O's. So a phoneme is shorter than phonemic awareness because a phoneme is just the smallest unit of speech. And phonemic awareness is that overall ability to manipulate those sounds and work towards substitution, deletion, identifying off those individual sounds. But knowing first what a phoneme is it's that smallest unit of sound.
So for example, how many phonemes are in the word, you could say, I guess, bass, bass, whatever you want to call it. There's an example of some phonemes representing different, or letters representing different sounds. What are they, and can a syllable be made up of more than 1 phoneme? So I'll just give you a second to think about that. You can pause if you want. So there are 3 phonemes in the word bass or bass. Like I said, up to you. It would be b, a, or a, and then s. So notice that there are only 3 phonemes and there are 4 letters because the s sound, the double S, it makes up 1 sound, which is a phoneme. So like I said before, spelling and phonemes do not always match. It's never the number, or well, I shouldn't say it's never. It's not always the number of letters that counts. Again, it's the number of sounds.
And then under phonological awareness, we talked about rhyming, onset and rhyme, phonemic awareness tasks. Just like that, there's the phoneme tasks that we can break down at a deeper level. So isolation would be what is the first sound in the word van, which is v. And then we talked about before the reason the v is in those dash marks is because it's talking about the sound, not the actual letter. Under phonological awareness, there is no connection to the written language, so we're not saying that van starts with a V. We're saying van starts with a V. And then phoneme identity is what sound is the same in fix, fall, and fun. So even though we're looking at more than one word, which is bigger than just a phoneme, we're talking about that initial sound. So it is under phonemic awareness tasks. And then phoneme categorization, bus, bun, rug, and then the word that doesn't belong would be bus, or would be rug because it doesn't begin with a b sound. And then phoneme blending, you give students the words separated out, so b, I, g, and then the child would respond and say big. And then phoneme deletion, what is smile without this? And they would make it mile. Then phoneme addition, add s to the beginning of park, and it would be spark. And then phoneme substitution, the word is bug, change g to n, and the new word is bun. So in all of these tasks, we are manipulating the smallest unit of sound. In those brackets, there's just 1 letter or 1 letter sound. So those are the phoneme awareness skills, and those go in order of easiest to hardest. So if I were to ask, or the exam were to ask, what is harder, to make the word bug bun, or to say the first sound in van, it would be substitution. It's the one that's further down, and it involves manipulating the actual word, making a change. So substitution is a higher order task than, say, identification.
So then this is just another visual that we provided for you of the umbrella called phonological awareness. So we start with word awareness, go to rhyme, syllables, onset and rhyme, and then this is where we get into phonemic awareness, dealing with phonemes. And again, this all goes in order, so they'll go from the lowest level skill to the highest, which is phonemic awareness, and then under phonemic awareness, there will be more skills that you'll have to know, and those will also go from lowest to highest, with substitution being the highest level skill.
So if you are a visual learner, again, that those beginning letters, you can give yourself kind of tips on that. WSOP here, I could make kind of a mnemonic device out of those beginnings to get that order down.
And that's a great study strategy too. When you go into the test and you have your whiteboard, if you can recreate this on your whiteboard, it'll help you a lot on the test, because there will be a lot of questions in this area, and especially if you know the phonemic awareness, the levels of that, that will be extremely helpful. So if you can recreate this somehow, you can create a different visual like Juliet said before too. And so then this is, sorry, just again, breaking it down, another visual. So it's starting with the words and syllables, rhyme, alliteration, onset and rhyme. And then it goes into phonemic awareness here, and it goes into finding the initial sounds, so identifying, blending, segmenting, deleting. So it goes with increasing complexity. It's called the staircase to success. So then we did an activity where we just defined and shared these words. So phoneme, grapheme, phonics, phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, syllable, and onset and rhyme. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video and see if you can recreate those definitions, then we will move forward. So a phoneme, we talked about this a little bit too today. So a phoneme is the smallest part of spoken language that makes a difference in the meaning of words. So English has 41 phonemes in this definition. Some say 44. A few words such as the ah or o have only one phoneme. Most words, however, have more than one phoneme. The word if has two phonemes, I and f. Check has three, ch, ek, and stop has four, st, ap. So sometimes one phoneme is represented by more than one letter, which we talked about today. So then a grapheme, we haven't talked about this too much yet, but a grapheme is the smallest part of written language that represents a phoneme in the spelling of a word. So a grapheme can be just one letter, so such as B, so B and B, D and D, F and F, or several letters, such as ch, sh, th. So the example that jumped out at me from reading this definition was the letter F being represented by F. So the PH also makes that sound, the F sound. And then phonics is the understanding that there is a predictable relationship between phonemes and graphemes. So there's a relationship between the sounds of spoken language, and there are letters and spellings that represent those sounds in written language. So it's connecting the two together.
And when we introduce the vocabulary word grapheme, you can kind of get, like we've talked about, phonemes, phonemic awareness, phonological awareness. Now we have phonics and graphemes. A way that I like to remember graphemes is thinking about the fact that a graph is a written representation of something. So in this case, a grapheme is the written representation of an individual phoneme. So graphemes represent phonemes, and it's very important in here that it says they could be just one letter or they could be several letters. So a grapheme is not just at its core a letter. A grapheme is the mapped written language of each phoneme. So in like the words in the grapheme IGH, if I had the word sigh, I have 2 phonemes in I, but I have more graphemes just based on the way that our language chooses to represent that in writing. So grapheme is a map of the sounds, a written map of the sounds, and the way that we map those sounds is with letters.
All right, so then what is the relationship between phonological and phonemic awareness? So if you have your umbrella nearby, you can refer to your umbrella and your definitions to figure this out. And then if you want, since we won't have partners, since this is an online session, just compare it to our definition and our explanation. So phonological awareness describes the ability to understand that oral language is made up of smaller sounds, such as words and syllables. Phonemic awareness refers to the specific type of phonological awareness involving the ability to separate phonemes in a spoken word. So phonemic awareness is part of phonological awareness, but again, it's focusing on the individual sounds. So they can isolate sounds. They can put a group of isolated sounds together to make a word. So just remember that phonological awareness is an umbrella. There's several terms that fall under it, and phonemic awareness relates to the individual phonemes, like I said, the sounds and words. So phonemic awareness is a part of the sequential or the sequence of phonological awareness.
And then phonemic awareness itself has its own sequence. So you could be asked a question about, like I mentioned earlier, if a phoneme substitution is more difficult than phoneme identification or isolation. So there is a sequential order of those phonemic awareness tasks under that phonological awareness umbrella. But when you're asked a question about phonemes, you can frame your question under that phonological awareness by considering, okay, we're talking about lights off. And then when you think about phoneme, you can think, okay, we're talking about the smallest unit of sound, and then think about that sequence in itself.
So then just continuing off of that, phonological awareness is a general term that describes the ability to understand oral language is made up of those smaller sounds. Like mentioned before, you manipulate spoken language and break spoken words into syllables, basically into any smaller units, and then phonemic awareness is very specific to the ability to manipulate those individual sounds or phonemes.
And then, so those phonological awareness skills addressed, so this would be similar to the visuals that you should already have, but we just want to remind you of those, what those skills kind of look like. So rhyming, syllables, counting words in a sentence, hearing and manipulating onset and rhyme, those are all phonological awareness tasks, no connection to the written form of language. And then under the phonological awareness component of phonemic awareness, we have the ability to manipulate and identify those individual phonemes, basic to complex. There is a hierarchy of skills. That order does matter. There are questions regarding which is a harder task and which is an easier task, which would require you to know that, say, deletion is a harder task than categorization, for example. Phonemic segmentation is considered a benchmark for demonstrating a complex level of phonemic awareness. So that was taking a word apart of ship and making it ship. And the ability of a student to identify those initial sounds or individual sounds is one of the greatest predictors of reading success. So that's why this all comes before we're introducing those letters.
All right, so then tips to approach such questions. So questions about the phonological and phonemic awareness. So don't focus too much on the grade level. It will have some importance, and I believe we'll go over that in the next session, the framework of grade, age, and skill. Just make sure you're constantly thinking of the phonological awareness umbrella. Think back to the known difference in the skill level that's demonstrated in the umbrella, and what would make the difference between the levels of that. And then try as best as you can to familiarize yourself with the order and specifically the highest and lowest level skills. So for example, you're starting out with rhyming and phonological awareness versus substitution, which is the highest level of phonemic awareness, which is also the highest level of phonological awareness. So those low-level skills versus the high-level skills. And then another example was like word awareness versus phonemic awareness. The questions will be very specific on those levels, and a lot of the times you'll be given a lot of very similar options, but the level will make all of the difference. So your knowledge on the level of phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, both, will have a huge part in deciding which answer is the best answer.
Yeah, going back to your written information and knowledge will be the most consistent and reliable way to decide on an answer, because you could frame a question thinking about, okay, second graders, but you could be asked a question about a second grader who is reading below grade level. You could be asked a question about a fifth grader who is an English language learner. The most consistent and reliable way will be your written notes of that order. Rhyming is never going to be harder than phoneme deletion in the test writer's minds. And while we're talking about test kind of strategies and grade levels, there is no hard and fast rule about first graders are introduced to phonics in September. All first graders can decode X by October. Everyone develops differently, and the test takers know that. As a general framework, what we've talked about so far in terms of phonological awareness and now getting into phonics, that is very early elementary. By first grade, students have phonics instruction and they begin reading. Anytime that letters are introduced with sounds, that's phonics instruction. And anytime they're working with rhyming or clapping or syllables, that's a phonological awareness task. But you're never, unfortunately, going to approach a question that says, what is the definition of phonemic awareness? And you also never are going to approach a question that says, what can a third grader do? Because they acknowledge that all students are different, but they do also really like scenarios. So just be careful and rely on your written definition knowledge, because that will not change. But you could interact with a question about 3 different types of second graders.
So then just an example question really fast. So the question says, a kindergarten teacher could best determine if a child has begun to develop phonemic awareness by asking the child to A, count the number of words the child hears in a sentence as the teacher says the sentence. B, say the word cat, then say the first sound the child hears in the word. C, did I say C last time? Whoops. C, point to the correct letter on an alphabet chart as the teacher names specific letters. Or D, listen to the teacher say boat and coat and identify whether the 2 words rhyme. So some important things that I recognize in the answers right away is there are some that aren't related to phonemic awareness because they're focusing on phonics skills with the lights on. So pointing to the correct letter on an alphabet chart is not necessarily a phonemic awareness skill, especially when you're developing just phonemic awareness. You would not be at that level yet. So that one we can get rid of right away. I'm just going to see what the slide says. So yeah, which option can we rule out? So right away, I'd rule out C. Julia, anything to add?
Yep, so talking about letters there, we can definitely rule that out. When the teacher, so listening to the words boat and coat, we're talking about bigger parts of those words than just phonemes. It's the oat that rhymes with each other. So that I would also rule out, because that's a bigger part of a word than just a phoneme. And I know that a rhyming task on my umbrella is further to the left and not even under. Phonemic awareness, the only time it's under phonemic awareness is when they're asking what sound is the same. And they're not doing that here. So I would also rule out D. And then,
sorry, I just want to see what this says. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, we're new to this online thing, but if you want to pause the video and choose an answer, and then we'll go over the answer next. All right, yeah, so the correct answer was B. So right away, we got rid of C and D, and then you can get rid of A because counting the number of words is not directly related to phonemic awareness. If it said something about sounds or phonemes in a specific word, maybe so, but again, counting the number of words the child hears in a sentence as the teacher's saying the sentence is not related directly to phonemic awareness because you're not manipulating those individual sounds.
So, a further explanation, phonemic awareness, a type of phonological awareness, is the recognition that spoken words are made up of phonemes, so those smallest units of sound. And what B is actually doing is an identification task where they're saying that first sound, that smallest unit of speech, would be k.
So then this is just going over kind of what we said before. A, C, and D are incorrect because performing the task described does not require, these answers don't require using phonemic awareness. I don't know why it's double clicking. Okay.
So then another question we have, which of the following students is demonstrating the specific type of phonological awareness known as phonemic awareness? A student who, after being shown a letter of the alphabet, can orally identify its corresponding sounds. A student who listens to the words sing, ring, fling, and hang and can identify hang as different. A student who, after hearing the word hat, can orally identify the sound ends with t. And a student who listens to the word magazine and can determine it contains 3 syllables. So right away, I would rule out D personally because syllable awareness is a more broad skill that's further to the left on the umbrella. It's earlier, and the number of syllables does not correlate to the number of individual speech sounds, so it's not a phonemic awareness task. So I personally would rule out D.
And me, I would rule out A right away. So a student who, after being shown a letter of the alphabet, can orally identify its corresponding sound. So again, that's relating to visual, where phonological awareness is all with the lights off. So right away, after me rating being shown, I just crossed that one out right away just because it's everything's with the lights off when you're doing phonological and phonemic awareness. So that one's just kind of irrelevant.
And then the rhyming in B is similar to that last question we had, where yes, hang is different, but this student isn't demonstrating that individual speech sound awareness. They're just recognizing a difference. We don't know if they're able to say it's the a sound that's different than the ing or than the I before the ng. So that also would not work because rhyming is a further to the left task, an earlier task, and we're not working with an individual speech sound in that. At least we don't know for sure.
So then with that, what makes C a potential answer? So looking at our answer, it says a student who, after hearing the word hat, can orally identify that it ends with the sound t. So, excuse me, what makes C the potential answer is that they're manipulating an individual sound, a phoneme. So they're using their phonemic awareness skills to identify a sound at the end of the word. So at the end of the word hat, they hear the sound t is the ending sound. Oops, yeah, so C was the answer. So yeah, again, phonemic awareness is the recognition that spoken words are made up of phonemes, the discrete speech sounds of language. So then identifying the final sound or phoneme in a word demonstrates phonemic awareness, where the other ones were either not related or a little more of a more broad, easier, lower level skill. So A, B, and D are incorrect because the skills described can be performed without the ability to distinguish separate phonemes. So if you did get a little bit confused by answering D, because it did have to do with somewhat sounds, remember that even though you hear syllables in a word, you can clap 3 times. So like example, Juliet is Juliet, but you're not identifying just the ch, ch, and the which are the individual phonemes. So then, which of the following first grade students has attained the highest level of phonemic awareness? So A, a student who, after hearing the word hot in the sound I, can substitute I for a to make the word hit. B, a student who can orally segment the word wonderful into wonderful. C, a student who, after hearing the words fish and fun, can identify that they both begin with the same phoneme. Or D, a student who can orally segment the word train into its onset and rhyme. So right away, I look at two that I can get rid of that don't have anything really to do with anything near the highest level of phonemic awareness. So I know that onset and rhyme comes before phonemic awareness, so I can get rid of that one right away. And that's just looking back to my mental picture of my phonological awareness umbrella. That's way before, or well, it's not way before, but it's before students will start working with phonemic awareness, so that wouldn't be considered the highest level of phonemic awareness. And then B as well, a student who can orally segment the word wonderful into wonderful. So that's syllables, which is one of the lowest level skills of phonological awareness. So that leaves us with A and C, which are both phonemic awareness tasks and skills, but now we have to decide which is the highest level. So like we said before, phonemic awareness goes from the simplest skill to the more complex skills. So the visual here to the right will be opposite of what you have on your umbrella, but you're starting with the easier skills. So you can isolate a sound, you can identify a sound in a word, versus you can substitute a sound in a word. So for this question specifically, you will have to know the level of phonemic awareness or the levels of phonemic awareness. And we know that substitution is the most complex, highest level of phonemic awareness. And you're doing substitution in A, which is our first option. So a student who, after wearing the word hot and the sound I, can substitute I for a to make the word hit. So that student is demonstrating substitution based off of the definition, and that is the highest level of phonemic awareness.
And the reason I love this question is because it's a perfect example of what the test is really like, where I needed to approach this question knowing not only what phonological awareness is, but knowing that component of phonemic awareness and knowing the sequential skills under that phonemic awareness component as well. And by knowing that visual, I was able, and Katie was able to rule out right away that syllable awareness. She was able to right away rule out that onset and rhyme. And then taking it to a further step of knowing what phonemic awareness is, which is that individual sounds, she was able to talk through how identifying off that initial sound is easier than substituting. And in this example, you didn't need to know exactly which one is identity and which one is substitution. You can think to yourself too, okay, which one would be harder for a young child to do? And you probably would know that changing a word would be harder. But I do just appreciate this question, how it asks you quite a few things, but all of the things you can refer to, and you can kind of back yourself up by thinking, okay, does this actually make sense? And yes, that it would be harder to change a word than to say the first sound.
So if you wanted extra practice, these are just some ways you can use this question to practice more. So again, to answer this question correctly, you have to know what phonological awareness is, as well as the order of phonological awareness skills, as well as phonemic awareness in that level, the sequence of that as well.
So now getting into under that word awareness, just to further define before we move on to phonics, what alliteration is. So alliteration is when that beginning sound is the same. We have a repeated sound. So Sally sells seashells by the seashore, and then Peter Piper pickled peppers is referred to as alliteration, repeated beginning sound.
So then this is a question from Dr. Kate's Absolutely Not book. Some of you may have that book from Education 302. So asking students to listen to a word such as the word six, and then asking the students how many sounds they hear in the word six, is most appropriate for students who have A, relatively low level of phonological awareness, B, begun to develop systematic phonics skills, C, relatively high level of phonemic awareness, or D, begun to master the alphabetic principle. So let's see here. Oops. Well, okay. So let's just run through the answers really quick. So A, relatively low level of phonological awareness. So when you're thinking about your umbrella, and you're looking to the left of the umbrella on what a low-level skill would look like, that would be something such as word awareness, syllable awareness. And I think this question has to do with phonemic awareness because you're asking about the specific sounds they hear in the word. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of A right away. And then B has begun to develop systematic phonics skills. So phonics is relating the phonemes to graphemes like we talked about earlier in this presentation. And there's not really much to do with letters here because it's all the sound. And again, the sounds are represented by anything between the two slashes is focusing on a sound, not a letter or any sort of written language. So I'm gonna go ahead and get, rid of that one again. Geez, I'm just clicking away. And then C, relatively high level of phonemic awareness. So I'm thinking, okay, so the student is able to break the word six apart into six, so they can count that there's three sounds in that word. So yeah, I think they'd have a relatively high level of phonemic awareness to do so. So let's finish out the question with going over D. So D has begun to master the alphabetic principle, and again, that's relating the sounds that they're hearing to letters. So whenever I hear alphabetic principle, I think about the alphabet, which is written language and sounds connected. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that one as well. So then the best answer is being C.
And in more formal, like in like the terminology words, that would be a segmentation task where they're given a word and they are asked to pull it apart, which is further down than, like she said, identifying or categorizing. So segmentation task.
So then on your own, if you want to pause the video and go ahead and name a skill a child with phonological awareness could do. So remember that phonological awareness is an umbrella. So there are several skills and several things under the umbrella that a student would be able to do if they had phonological awareness skills. So if you want to just write the skill down in your notebook and then check, we have our example here as hearing and repeating rhymes using onset and rhyme. And then when you're done, just make sure that the skill that you developed or wrote down does have a direct correlation with something under the umbrella.
So then a similar related question, asking students to listen to a word same and then tell the teacher all the sounds they hear in the word is an exercise for students that would be most appropriate for students who have a low level of phonological awareness, are beginning to develop systematic phonics skills, have a relatively high level of phonemic awareness, and are beginning to master the alphabetic principle. Of course, these answers look very similar. We just wanted to show you how you're not always going to be looking at the same word. So memorizing the fact that six is six is a segmentation task isn't always going to be super beneficial because sometimes they might be asking you about the word same. In all cases, asking a student to say all the sounds is a segmentation task, and segmentation tasks working with all the sounds are phonemes, so that would be a segmentation task under that phonemic awareness category. And it would be a higher level skill than, say, identifying or categorizing. For B, are developing systematic phonics skills. There's no connection to written language here. We're just talking about sounds. And then for D, the alphabetic principle, again, there's no connection to the written language. So again, C would be the best answer.
What the heck? All right, so then this is the next question. A kindergarten teacher asked a small group of students to repeat after her. First, she says the word grape and then pronounces it as grape. Then, next, she says the word take and pronounces it as t-ake. This activity is likely to promote the student's phonemic awareness primarily by, so the options are A, helping them recognize distinct syllables in oral language, B, encouraging them to divide words into onset and rhyme, C, teaching them how to distinguish between consonants and vowels, or D, promoting their awareness of letter sound correspondence. So this is a question to me that's a little longer than it really has to be. So right away, one thing stands out to me in the question, and that's breaking the word apart and where that's happening. So it's happening, the gr is everything before the vowel, and the ape is everything, the vowel and everything after. So right away, I think of onset and rhyme. So this activity is directly promoting them to divide words into onset and rhyme. So yeah, with that being said, in the activity described, the teacher provides direct instruction in segmenting single syllable words into onset and rhyme. So that is like into the initial consonant sounds of the word and then the vowel and the rest of the word after. So promoting student mastery of onset-rime segmentation prepares students for learning further phonemic awareness skills. So this is contributing to their development of phonemic awareness by preparing them to segment the words and sounds into onset and rhyme. If you want to see why the were incorrect, you can go ahead and pause.
So now that we have talked about how the order in which students identify sounds, manipulate those small units of sounds, it's important before we fully introduce phonics to get an understanding of that correspondence between letters and sounds. So there is a connection between individual letters and the sounds that they represent, some being more consistent than others, like we talked about the fact that there are more phonemes than there are letters. So letter-sound correspondence refers to the identification of sounds associated with individual letters and letter combinations. So when students start looking at any book with a letter M in it, for example, they're going to be making the sound. So there's that connection between the letters and the sounds that they make. So at the point that a student is able to match those letters with the sounds that they make, this is the point where phonemic awareness begins to overlap with orthographic awareness. And orthographic awareness is that visual connection between the letters and the sounds that they make to actually produce that sound when they look at that written mapped letter, that written grapheme. So readers would look at letters on the page, use their knowledge of the sound symbol relationships, for example, the fact that represents M or M represents to sound out tricky words. Eventually, the visual memory of the word makes a solid memory, and that could become a sight word if it becomes memorized and they're consistently exposed to it. But a big takeaway just from this slide is the fact that there is a correspondence between the sounds that we make and the letters that represent those sounds. And this letter sound correspondence is used to sound out unfamiliar words.
So then a related question. So as students begin to read, the ability to blend phonemes orally contributes to their reading development, primarily because it helps students A, recognize and understand sight words in a text, B, use knowledge of letter sound correspondence to decode words, C, guess the meaning of unfamiliar words from their context, or D, divide written words into onset and rhyme. So when I'm looking through the answer, or through the answers, I'm looking at A, so recognizing and understanding sight words in a text. So as students are beginning to read, the ability to blend phonemes orally. So does this contribute directly to their reading development by understanding the sight words using blending? There's not a direct correlation there, so I'm going to go ahead and set A to the side. B, use knowledge of letter sound correspondence to decode words. So there, that one's a little more reasonable because blending the phonemes again, blending the phonemes orally is contributing directly to their decoding skills because they're recognizing the letters and the sounds that correspond. Guess the meaning of unfamiliar words from their context. Guessing the meaning of an unfamiliar word is never going to be the answer on the FoRT. Any skill that has to do with guessing and placing random meaning along with words will definitely not help the students' reading development primarily. Then dividing written words into onset and rhyme. So again, when you're thinking on like the levels of the skills, it doesn't directly correlate or contribute to the reading development at all at that low of a level. So the correct answer would be B.
So what this truly is asking or talking about is, say a student knows that M makes a sound, A makes an A sound, and P makes a P sound. and they're looking at a book and they come across the word map. So their ability to do app, map is what they're actually talking about. So a student's ability to blend those phonemes that are represented by those graphemes, the letters that represent the phonemes, contributes to their reading development by using their knowledge of letter sound correspondence to decode words. Matching those letters with the sounds is going to be critical for them to be able to sound out those words. So as students begin to read, the ability to blend phonemes orally contributes because it helps students use knowledge of letter sound correspondence to decode those words, to put them together, to put all those sounds together, app into map. And phonemic blending is the ability to combine a sequence of speech sounds, phonemes, together to form a word. So beginning readers are going to be sounding out a lot of words, so they'll be using their phonemic blending skills and their knowledge of letter sound correspondence to sound out and blend the sounds of simple printed words. Sight words they would have already had memorized, so they're not going to be always sounding out, say, and. They're not always, a sight word is memorized, and then onset and rhyme, that wouldn't necessarily help them with every single word. Not every word would have an onset and rhyme. We're talking about their ability to match sounds with letters.
So then again, A, C, and D all describe literacy skills that are unrelated to phonemic blending. So then another related question, so this question is pretty long, so a couple tips that we pointed out was, what is the question actually asking? And what skill does it take? So let's read the question before I get into that. The question says, a beginning level English language learner can consistently blend individual phonemes to make simple English words composed of 2 or 3 phonemes, but is having difficulty blending the sounds of familiar single syllable words composed of 4 phonemes. So example is clip, trap, spin. So which of the following questions would be most important for the first grade teacher to consider when addressing the needs of the student? So again, looking back at what the question is actually asking, it's talking about blending. So it's blending specifically 2, 3 phonemes they can blend, but we're looking at why they can't blend the sounds of single syllable words with 4 phonemes. So it's asking specifically about those. So let's review the answers. So A, are the targeted words in the student's oral vocabulary in English? B, does the student's primary language have consonant blends? C, can the student distinguish between short and long vowel sounds in English? And D, do the target words have consonants in this student's primary language? So again, we're specifically talking about blending in this question specifically. I don't want to click because I'm scared to look at the answer, but I'm good. Okay, it did. So again, like I said, zooming in on blending, we're just going to go ahead and roll with it. So the correct answer would be B. And this is because while there are approximately 100 speech sounds or phonemes used in human language as a whole, only a portion of them are used in any given language, and the set varies across each language. Also, each language has its own constraints on permissible phoneme combinations. So this question was a little tricky because we didn't really talk about how the ability to blend phonemes or manipulate phonemes varies in different languages. So it's important to know you're talking about an English language learner in this problem, but also you're talking about a specific skill, which is blending, which would make A, C, and D incorrect because they're not directly related to the defined skill of blending. Oh, they skipped a slide again. So again, the student doesn't need to know meaning of a word to do the skill of blending, and then C is incorrect because the example words contain only short vowel sounds. So when we're looking at the example words clip, trap, and spin, those are all short vowel sounds. There's nothing to do with long vowels. So it's all about focusing on the specifics, and even though the question seems very long, pulling it apart and recognizing what the important parts of the question are and relating them to each of the answers. So just thinking ahead, what do the words clip, trap, and spin have in common?
So with clip, trap, and spin, again, the reason that those are consonant blends is because we outwardly say the k and the l in clip. We outwardly hear and say the t and the in trap, and then we outwardly hear the s and the p in spin.
So then just another visual review for phonological awareness. It's very similar to your umbrella, just set out in a less complex way. And that is what we had for today. So there is a link on the slides that will be posted on Canvas. There's some review questions here about everything that we talked about today. So if you want to go ahead and take the quiz on your free time, feel free to. If you did it already in the session, that's also fine. You can also click it just to review the answers. But that is it, and then we will see you in the next session.